Forget what Hollywood told you about the Old West. The tall hats, the noon duels, the noble homesteader building a paradise out of dirt. Real newspapers, real doctors' ledgers, and real probate records paint a rougher picture. Today we're counting down 8 ordinary objects that sat in real frontier households, and every single one of them tells you something about how painful, precarious, and often brutal daily life actually was out there. Here's what you're getting. We're ranking these 8 items from unsettling to outright horrifying, using nothing but documented accounts, diaries, store ledgers, and medical records from the 1850s through the 1890s. No myth. Just the stuff that was actually sitting on the shelf. Let's start at number 8. Number 8. The whalebone corset. Now, you're probably picturing this as a fashion object, something a saloon girl wore in a movie. But out on a working homestead, a corset wasn't decoration. It was infrastructure. Women wore stiffened, boned undergarments through pregnancy, through farm labor, through summers that regularly hit 105 degrees with zero shade for miles. Doctors of the era documented deformed ribs, displaced organs, and fainting spells so common they had a name for the smelling salts kept on hand just in case. Think about wearing a rigid plastic exoskeleton under your clothes while hauling water buckets in Kansas heat. That's roughly the physical experience we're talking about. Some historians argue the health effects have been exaggerated by later writers looking to make a point. And that's fair. We should flag that debate, but the ledgers from frontier general stores show whalebone stays as one of the most frequently restocked items in the entire dry goods trade. That tells you something about how central and how physically demanding that garment really was. Number 7. The branding iron. Everybody's seen the movie version. A cowboy presses it to a cow's hide, there's a little smoke, we cut away. The reality was uglier and slower. A branding iron was typically heated to somewhere around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to sear through hide and fat in about 3 to 5 seconds. That's roughly the surface temperature of a working blacksmith's forge, applied directly to a living animal that is actively trying to kick your skull in, while 3 grown men hold it down. Ranch hands lost fingers, they lost teeth from kicks. Infection from a poorly sealed brand could kill a calf outright, and the branding season itself, usually spring roundup, left cowhands with burn scars on their own forearms that lasted a lifetime. This wasn't a stylistic flourish for a movie poster. It was hard, dangerous physical labor done at scale dozens of times a day for weeks. Number 6, the sod house, or soddy as settlers called it. Picture this. You've just arrived on the Great Plains, and there isn't a single tree in sight to build a proper cabin. So you cut bricks straight out of the prairie itself, thick slabs of root-bound earth, and you stack them into walls. It sounds almost charming until you learn what actually lived inside those walls. Snakes. Insects. Occasionally, according to more than one documented account, a family would wake up to find a rattlesnake had worked its way down through the sod roof during a rainstorm. Roofs leaked mud for days after a heavy rain. Settlers described their floors turning to a kind of thin soup that swallowed boot heels. And if you're wondering about air quality, imagine living inside a compost pile that also happened to be your bedroom. That's not an exaggeration for effect. It's close to how several settlers described it in their own letters home. If you're enjoying this countdown so far, go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe. We've got 5 more objects, and they get considerably darker from here. Number 5, the laudanum bottle. This one's going to surprise some of you. Laudanum was a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, and it was sold completely legally over the counter in nearly every frontier general store and pharmacy in America. Mothers gave it to teething infants. Doctors prescribed it for menstrual cramps, for coughs, for what they vaguely called nerves. It was, in effect, the frontier's aspirin, cough syrup, and sedative rolled into one small brown bottle, except the active ingredient was, chemically speaking, close cousin to modern-day morphine. Now here's the part that historians still argue about. How many frontier deaths, particularly infant deaths, were quietly caused by accidental laudanum overdose rather than the illness it was meant to treat? We don't have a clean number, because death certificates from the period rarely specified. But medical journals from the 1870s were already raising alarms about the laudanum habit among frontier women, and pharmacy sale records show it moving off shelves in volumes that frankly should worry you a little. Number 4, the dentist's turnkey. And here's where we get our unlikely villain of the story. You'd expect the most feared man in a frontier town to be the sheriff, or the gunslinger, or the outlaw riding through. In a lot of towns, it was actually the dentist, or more accurately, Whoever happened to own a turnkey that week, because plenty of barbers, blacksmiths, and general store owners moonlighted in dentistry with zero formal training. The turnkey looked almost gentle, like a small metal key with a claw on the end. In practice, it was clamped onto a rotting tooth and twisted, not pulled straight out, twisted like turning a stubborn bolt, until the tooth cracked loose from the jawbone. No anesthetic in most rural areas until well into the later frontier period. Patients were sometimes held down by 2 or 3 men. Broken jaws from botched extractions were common enough to show up repeatedly in frontier medical writing. So next time a movie gives you the tough-as-nails gunslinger as the scariest man in town, remember, the guy with the little metal key in his apron pocket was probably scarier, and he didn't need a 6-shooter to do it. Number 3, barbed wire. This one changed the entire American West, and it did it through sheer physical brutality. Before barbed wire, cattle roamed open range. After it, in a matter of roughly a decade, the plains were carved up into fenced private property, and that fencing was studded every few inches with sharp steel barbs designed specifically to tear flesh. Cattle ran into it in storms and shredded themselves trying to get free. Ranchers got their hands sliced open, stringing it in freezing weather, wire biting through leather gloves like they were paper. And it wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a weapon in the range wars. Fences got cut in the dead of night. Men died over property lines marked by a few strands of sharpened wire. Some historians frame barbed wire as one of the most quietly violent inventions in American history, more responsible for frontier bloodshed than any 6-gun, simply because of how many range wars it directly triggered. Number 2, the midwife's birthing kit. Legend paints frontier childbirth as something almost pastoral. A woman in a rocking chair, a kindly neighbor boiling water, a healthy baby by morning. The actual instruments tell a starker story. A typical kit included forceps that, without x-rays or any real anatomical imaging, were used essentially by feel. It included a hook, grimly known in period medical texts as a crotchet, used in the rare and devastating cases where a baby had already died in the womb and needed to be removed to save the mother's life. Maternal mortality in the frontier period is estimated by some historians at somewhere around 1 in every 150 to 200 births. Compare that to modern maternal mortality rates, which sit at a tiny fraction of a percent, and you start to understand just how routinely women were gambling with their lives simply by getting pregnant. No sterile gloves, no anesthesia, beyond maybe a swig of whiskey. Some accounts describe midwives traveling for hours on horseback through blizzards to reach a laboring mother, arriving to find they were already too late to save one or both. This wasn't Hollywood's cozy cabin scene. It was one of the single most dangerous events in a frontier woman's life, full stop. And that brings us to our second reminder. If this is hitting different than the version of the Old West you grew up watching, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because our number 1 object is where this whole video's been building, and it deserves your full attention. Number 1. The Colt Single Action Army Revolver. The gun history nicknamed the Peacemaker, which, frankly, is one of the more ironic names in American firearms history. This wasn't just a symbol, it was a precisely engineered instrument of close-range killing, and to understand why it belongs at number 1, we need to walk through exactly what it did on the night of October the 26th, 1881, outside a rented corral in Tombstone, Arizona territory. It's just after 2 in the afternoon. Dust hangs in the air from a dry autumn wind that's been kicking through Tombstone's dirt streets all day. Roughly 30 men have gathered to watch, word having spread through town in the way word does, in a place with 1 telegraph line and a lot of idle time. Wyatt Earp, his brothers Virgil and Morgan, and Doc Holliday walk down Fremont Street toward a narrow, vacant lot beside Fly's boarding house. Across from them stand Billy Clanton, Frank and Tom McClory, and Ike Clanton. The distance between the two groups, by most careful historical reconstructions, is somewhere between 6 and 10 feet. Let that sink in for a second. That's closer than most living rooms are wide. That's the distance between you and someone standing at your kitchen counter while you're at your dining table. At that range, a black powder Colt revolver, firing a lead round somewhere around .45 caliber, roughly the diameter of your thumb, doesn't just wound, it devastates. The shooting itself lasts, by most estimates, somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds. Historians still argue over exactly who fired first. Some accounts point to Wyatt, others to Billy Clanton, and that dispute has genuinely never been settled to everyone's satisfaction. What we do know because it's documented in coroner's reports and courtroom testimony afterward, is brutal in its specifics. Tom McClory takes a shotgun blast to the chest and is dead within moments. Billy Clanton is hit multiple times, in the wrist, the chest, the abdomen, and, according to witness testimony, does not die instantly. He lies in the dirt for several minutes, reportedly begging for more cartridges to keep fighting even as he's bleeding out, a detail that stuck with historians precisely because it strips away any romance from the moment. Frank McClory is shot through the head at close range in the fight's final seconds. Virgil Earp takes a bullet through the calf. Morgan Earp is hit across the shoulders, the round grazing his spine closely enough that half an inch either direction might have killed or paralyzed him. Doc Holliday, the gambler and dentist, yes, dentist, there's an object connection for you, takes a graze along his hip that barely breaks skin. When the smoke clears, 3 men are dead, and the entire gunfight, the one that would define frontier mythology for the next century and a half in dime novels, radio dramas, and eventually film, took less time than it takes to read this paragraph out loud. 30 seconds, 6 to 10 feet, 3 men in the ground by sundown. That's not the slow motion, 20-pace walk-down you've seen in 100 westerns. That's a chaotic, close-range, almost accidental feeling burst of violence between men who, in most accounts, actually knew each other from around town. So here's the thing that ties this whole list together. Every one of these 8 objects, the corset, the branding iron, the sod house, the laudanum bottle, the turnkey, the barbed wire, the birthing kit, and finally that revolver, was just a normal household or working item. Nobody in Tombstone or on the Kansas plains thought of these things as instruments of horror. They were Tuesday. They were the ordinary texture of getting through a week. And that, more than any gunfight body count, is what actually made the frontier brutal. Not that violence was constant, but that pain, risk, and mortality were baked so thoroughly into ordinary objects that nobody even remarked on it. The West wasn't dangerous because of outlaws. It was dangerous because the dentist's chair, the birthing bed, and the medicine cabinet were already doing plenty of damage before anyone ever drew a gun. If you learned something today, do us a favor and smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this one with somebody who thinks they already know the real Old West. We'll see you in the next video, where we're taking a closer, unflinching look at frontier medicine. And trust me, it gets worse before it gets better.